Beyond the Gates spoilers teased that Bill would do everything in his power to save his daughter Chelsea, even when the odds seemed insurmountable and the darkness of human obsession closed in like a suffocating net. What began as a desperate pursuit turned into something larger, a labyrinth of secrets and betrayals, where loyalty was tested and the bonds of family were pulled taut against the madness of one woman's fixation. Bill's life had never been easy, but nothing in his years of struggles, triumphs, and failures could prepare him for the moment when Chelsea was ripped away. The initial shock was not even the most painful part, it was the silence that followed, the hollow emptiness of the house, the faint echo of her laughter in his mind. Danny, Chelsea's mother, had looked him dead in the eye and ordered him to find her, to save her, no matter the cost. There was no negotiation in her tone, no wavering softness of grief. It was the cold steel of a mother demanding that her child be brought home alive. Bill accepted without hesitation, though inside he trembled. He had already let his family down in so many ways. He could not fail now. The first whispers of who had taken Chelsea surfaced quickly. Allison, a name that barely belonged in the same orbit as their lives, and yet it became the black sun around which their nightmare revolved. Allison had disguised her intentions, pretending to be an ally, weaving her way into trust with subtle smiles and carefully chosen words. But beneath the facade lay a hunger, a twisted adoration for Chelsea that blurred the line between admiration and possession. Allison believed she loved Chelsea. She believed that love justified anything, even tearing her from her family. The abduction itself had been planned with a meticulous cruelty. Chelsea was not merely snatched, manipulated, led away under the guise of safety and comfort. Allison's game was deception, her strategy to convince everyone that Chelsea's disappearance was an accident, a misunderstanding, something benign. But Danny was not fooled. A mother's instinct cut sharper than any blade, and she knew. Bill's mission was therefore clear: find Allison before she succeeded in dragging Chelsea too far away to recover. The Dupree family was no ordinary family to cross. Their reach extended beyond wealth into legacy, power, and the kind of influence that bent communities and authorities alike. Allison may have believed her obsession gave her strength, but against the Duprees, her time was limited. Bill set out with urgency, moving through streets and safe houses, following the thin trail Allison had left behind. He replayed every conversation with Chelsea, every look, every silence, searching for clues in the memory of his daughter's world. When he finally tracked them down, it was not a cinematic showdown in a crowded space, but a quieter, more chilling confrontation. Allison had taken Chelsea to a decrepit warehouse at the edge of the city, a place that smelled of rust and decay, where the echoes of dripping water underscored the tension. Chelsea was tied to a chair, her eyes wide but unbroken, her spirit refusing to yield even in the face of terror. The moment Bill burst through the door, time fractured. For Chelsea, it was relief mixed with terror. For Allison, it was rage, the realization that her plan was unraveling. And for Bill, it was the raw force of a father's instinct colliding with desperation. He ran forward, hands fumbling with the ropes that bound Chelsea's wrists, his breath coming fast as he whispered reassurances to her. He didn't even hear Allison approaching until the impact came sharp, blinding pain as something heavy struck him from behind. Chelsea's scream pierced the air, echoing off the walls like a jagged blade. Bill staggered forward, his vision swimming, but he refused to collapse. His body screamed in protest, but his heart, fueled by love and fear, demanded he stay upright. Allison loomed over him, weapon in hand, her face twisted in a grotesque mask of devotion and fury. "You don't understand," she hissed. "She doesn't belong to you anymore. She belongs with me. I love her more than you ever could." The words were venom, yet behind them lay a pitiful truth. Allison was broken, consumed by a delusion she could not control. Her obsession had devoured her sanity. Chelsea, though trembling, found her voice. She spat the words like fire. "You don't love me. You're destroying me." For Bill, hearing his daughter's defiance lit something inside him. The injury throbbed, his blood seeping, but he clenched his jaw and surged forward, forcing himself between Allison and Chelsea. The scuffle that followed was brutal, not elegant, A desperate clash of survival rather than skill. The chaos of that night was more than just physical, it was emotional, transformative. For months, even years, Chelsea and Bill had drifted apart, separated by miscommunication, by disappointments, by the natural fissures that grow between parent and child. But in that moment of shared fear, of facing the storm together, those fissures began to close. Chelsea saw the lengths her father would go, not as a distant figure weighed down by his own struggles, but as the man who would bleed to protect her. Yet danger remained. Allison was not a fleeting shadow but a storm in human form. Her obsession had driven her past the point of reason, and reason could no longer be appealed to. Even as Bill shielded Chelsea, Allison snarled like a cornered predator. All around them, the walls of the warehouse seemed to close in, every flickering light bulb, every rusted beam amplifying the claustrophobic nightmare. Outside, sirens grew closer. The Duprees had pulled their strings, the authorities were converging. But inside, the minutes stretched into hours, each second a battle for survival. Allison's mind was a labyrinth of contradictions. She claimed love, but her actions screamed violence. She wanted to preserve Chelsea, but every strike, every threat, shattered the very thing she claimed to cherish. Her behavior no longer followed any rational pattern. She was consumed by a mania that could only end one way: confinement or destruction. Bill knew he could not wait for the police to intervene. Every second wasted was another second Chelsea remained in danger. With strength drawn from the rawest corners of his soul, he launched himself once again, locking Allison in a desperate grapple. The struggle was messy, violent, but it bought Chelsea the seconds she needed to free her hands. The ropes finally fell loose, and Chelsea stumbled to her feet, rushing to Bill's side. For the first time in what felt like forever, father and daughter fought not in words but in unity, their bond reforged in the crucible of fear. But Allison was relentless. Her madness gave her a strength that defied logic, her need to claim Chelsea blinding her to pain or reason. It was no longer about escape for her, it was about domination, about proving that her obsession was more powerful than blood itself. The Dupree family's power was not abstract in this moment, it was tangible. Bill thought of Danny's command, the weight of legacy pressing down on him. Failure was not an option, not when Chelsea's life hung in the balance. He drove Allison back, inch by inch, his wounds screaming but his determination unbroken. Somewhere in the chaos, Martin's words echoed like a distant prophecy. Martin had always warned Samantha, Chelsea's sister, about the dangers of the world, about predators cloaked in charm. He had told her to protect herself, to recognize threats before they sank their teeth in. This ordeal was not just Chelsea's trial, it was Samantha's lesson too, carved in blood and terror. For Samantha, watching from the shadows where the Duprees had maneuvered her for safety, the message was seared into her soul. She saw the cost of naivety, the danger of trust misplaced. She promised herself, and later her family, that she would never be caught unprepared again. The night grew darker, the walls of the warehouse dripping with the tension of lives at stake. The police sirens grew louder, but still, Allison refused to stop. Her obsession had consumed her so thoroughly that capture meant nothing to her. What mattered was taking Chelsea, breaking her free from the world that, in Allison's twisted mind, did not deserve her brilliance. Bill's strength was fading, but his spirit was not. Chelsea clung to him, whispering through tears, urging him not to give up. Every word from her was fuel, every look a reminder of what he was fighting for. For the first time in years, Chelsea saw him not as the flawed man who had stumbled, but as her father, the man who would give everything for her. The battle was not yet finished. The punishment Allison deserved had not yet been delivered. The Dupree family's reckoning was only beginning. The storm inside the warehouse had reached its peak, but the outcome remained uncertain, suspended in the raw electricity of fear and love colliding in equal measure. And as the sirens finally screeched to a halt outside, footsteps rushing closer, one truth became undeniable: this was not merely a rescue. This was the rebirth of a bond, the ignition of a legacy, and the beginning of Allison's inevitable downfall. The chaos of the warehouse left its mark not only on the broken walls but on the hearts of those involved. The police stormed the building just as Bill was barely holding Allison back, But before they could fully secure the scene, Allison's shrill cry tore through the air. Her madness was not quieted by the sight of armed officers, it burned hotter. Wild with the idea that someone was trying to strip Chelsea away from her grasp, the officers dragged her down, their shouts and the sound of metal restraints clashing with her desperate pleas, but her eyes never left Chelsea. That stare was a haunting promise, a warning that her obsession would not vanish simply because steel bars confined her body. Chelsea, still shaking, pressed close to Bill as the chaos subsided around them. For her, the pain of being bound and the fear of being taken had not broken her spirit, but the image of Allison's obsession left deep scars. Danny arrived minutes later, her presence a storm of rage and relief, wrapping her daughter tightly in her arms while her eyes lingered on Bill. There was gratitude, but there was also a weight in her gaze, an acknowledgement that the nightmare had exposed how close their family had come to shattering. In the days that followed, Allison became a specter looming over every conversation. The Dupree family demanded swift justice, ensuring their influence pushed the authorities to move quickly. To them, Allison was more than a criminal, she was a direct insult to their power. No one touched their bloodline and walked away without consequences. Every whisper in their estate halls, every hushed conversation among their allies reinforced the same truth: Allison would be punished severely. Not just by law but by the social and political weight of a family determined to protect its name. Yet for Chelsea, the ordeal wasn't something that could be brushed away by courtroom sentences or whispered threats. She replayed Allison's words again and again. "She belongs with me." It wasn't just obsession, it was a sickness, and Chelsea struggled with the knowledge that someone had seen her not as a person but as an object of possession. Nightmares clawed at her sleep. Visions of Allison's face hovering just beyond the shadows, always reaching, always whispering. Bill stayed close, refusing to let the old distance return. His injuries from the warehouse kept him physically limited, but emotionally, he found strength he hadn't known in years. Every moment with Chelsea became precious, and in her own way, she began to see him differently. Their bond, once frayed by years of disappointment, began to mend. Yet both father and daughter knew their healing was happening in the shadow of Allison's madness, and shadows could stretch far longer than anyone anticipated. Martin's role in the aftermath revealed itself with quiet clarity. He looked to Samantha, who had witnessed the storm of events, and spoke with the authority of someone who had already seen too much of the world's cruelty. "You see what obsession does, don't you? You see how fast someone can disguise danger as love." He wanted Samantha to learn from what had happened, to sharpen her instincts, to protect herself so that no one would ever have the chance to do to her what Allison had tried with Chelsea. Samantha listened, her eyes burning with determination. For her, this wasn't just a lesson, it was a transformation. She vowed to herself that she would not be fragile, that no mask of kindness would ever blind her again. And in Martin's stern nod of approval, there was a flicker of reassurance that the younger generation of the Dupree family was beginning to understand what legacy demanded: vigilance, strength, and survival. As Allison awaited trial, her behavior only confirmed what everyone already knew. In her cell, she raved, screamed, and spoke Chelsea's name like a prayer twisted into a curse. Guards reported her mood swings, sometimes quiet and tearful, speaking as though Chelsea would forgive her and return, other times violent, lashing out as though the entire world conspired to steal Chelsea away. To the Duprees, it was clear she was dangerous. The law could cage her, but her obsession would never die. This terrified Danny most of all. For her, Allison wasn't just a deranged woman, they symbolized every threat to the family's bloodline, every person willing to tear at the foundation of their legacy. Danny's voice hardened whenever she spoke of Allison, demanding that the punishment be absolute. She told Bill bluntly one night, "We don't need her alive to haunt us. We need her gone." Bill, still raw from the rescue, said nothing at first, but the idea lingered like smoke. Chelsea, however, began to feel torn. The girl who had once only wanted her father to keep his distance now grappled with the paradox of hating Allison and yet pitying her. How could anyone fall so deeply into obsession that reality itself dissolved? And what did it mean for Chelsea's future if people could see her not as herself but as something to claim? These questions plagued her more than she admitted, questions that even Bill's protective presence couldn't answer. The trial loomed, and with it, a chance for the Duprees to showcase their unyielding authority. But trials weren't always simple. Whispers spread that Allison might try to manipulate her way into leniency, claiming mental instability, claiming she was not responsible for her actions. Some even suggested she might attempt to expose secrets about the Dupree family, fabricating lies or twisting truths as one final strike against the people she blamed for taking Chelsea away. This possibility turned Martin's warning to Samantha into something more urgent. He sat her down again, this time speaking of strength not just in defense but in silence. "They'll come for us in every way they can. When it's not with ropes and knives, it'll be with words. You must learn to guard yourself in every sense." Samantha absorbed every syllable, aware that the world was much darker than she had ever allowed herself to believe. As the date of judgment drew near, Allison's presence became an obsession of its own for the Duprees. Danny found herself consumed by the desire for Allison's downfall, and Chelsea, though reluctant to admit it, found her life shifting again. She was now more than just a victim, she was a symbol of resilience, the embodiment of why the Duprees were feared and respected. She carried the weight of being the daughter who had been stolen and returned, and everyone expected her to rise stronger for it. The night before Allison's trial, Chelsea and Bill shared a moment that neither of them could have imagined just months before. Sitting together in silence, Bill turned to her and spoke with a voice thick with emotion. "I thought I'd lost you long before she ever took you. I let distance steal us apart. But now, I won't let anything, not her, not the past, stand between us again." Chelsea, tears in her eyes, leaned against him, realizing that through Allison's madness, something fragile but profound had been rebuilt. Yet even with this fragile renewal of family bonds, the storm was far from over. Allison's madness was not something that ended neatly with a gavel strike. The Duprees' new enemies did not always vanish, they lingered, they returned. They found ways to infect the present. And as the doors of the courtroom prepared to open, as the world prepared to hear Allison's twisted testimony, one thing was certain: this ordeal was not merely about punishment. It was about legacy, about survival, and about ensuring that Chelsea, Samantha, and every future Dupree understood the world would always come for them and they must always be ready to fight back. And so, the stage was set. The fight that began in a crumbling warehouse would spill into the world beyond, where reputation, influence, and truth itself would be tested. The threat of Allison was not over. It was only changing shape, growing sharper, more dangerous, and more personal than ever before. The verdict finally came down with the weight of inevitability. The courtroom was filled with tension thick enough to choke on, every eye fixed on Allison as the judge read the sentence. Her outbursts, her rambling declarations of love for Chelsea, her violent resistance even in chainsaw of it had been paraded before the jury. The Dupree family's influence pushed the trial forward with speed and precision, leaving no room for doubt. Allison was declared guilty on all counts and sentenced to a long confinement in a psychiatric institution under maximum security. To the outside world, justice had been served. But inside the Dupree family, the conclusion was not so clean. Danny watched Allison being dragged away with a look that was equal parts satisfaction and contempt. It wasn't enough for her. To Danny, punishment wasn't just about removing Allison from their lives, it was about erasing her completely. She whispered to Bill in the courthouse hallway, her voice sharp as broken glass, "She will never stop. Even caged, she'll be thinking of Chelsea. And I don't want that shadow hanging over us forever." Bill didn't respond, but the unease in his chest told him she was right. Chelsea tried to carry herself with strength, but the scars Allison left were invisible chains. The image of Allison's eyes, the unblinking devotion of a woman who confused love with possession, haunted her. At night she woke gasping, certain she could hear Allison's voice whispering her name. Her family celebrated her safety, but she didn't feel safe. She wondered if she ever would again. Samantha, meanwhile, stood taller than before. She had absorbed Martin's lessons with fierce determination. To her, Allison's downfall wasn't just justice, it was a living warning. She carried herself with sharper instincts now, more cautious, more aware. Martin noticed the shift in her and allowed himself the smallest smile of relief, though his heart remained restless. Protecting the next generation of Duprees would always be his burden. For Bill, the rescue had changed everything. He and Chelsea spoke more now than they had in years. Their silences were no longer filled with resentment but with a shared understanding of how close they had come to losing each other. The bond, fragile and scarred, began to heal. Yet he couldn't escape the echo of Danny's words. He knew Allison's obsession wasn't the kind that disappeared with walls and guards. It was a sickness that would gnaw and twist, a sickness that might one day spill beyond bars. Whispers began to circulate, even beyond the courtroom. Reporters called Allison the woman who tried to steal a Dupree. Sensational headlines painted her as both monster and tragic figure. Her name became a stain tied to the Dupree legacy, and Danny despised it. To her, every mention of Allison was another attempt to tie their powerful bloodline to a mad woman's story. She pushed harder behind the scenes, ensuring that Allison's name would be buried under layers of shame and silence. Chelsea, however, wrestled with conflicting feelings. She hated Allison, feared her, but in quiet moments she also pitied her. What kind of emptiness could consume someone so deeply that they mistook control for affection? She didn't dare say it aloud, knowing her family would never understand. But sometimes she found herself wondering if Allison had once been a victim of obsession herself. The thought only deepened her unease. The Duprees gathered one night in the ancestral estate, their voices hushed but urgent. Danny pressed for finality, Martin spoke of vigilance, Samantha listened with sharpened focus, and Bill stood torn between his wife's ruthless demands and his daughter's fragile attempts to heal. They all agreed on one truth: Allison may have been locked away, but her presence lingered. As long as Chelsea lived, Allison's ghost, whether in body or memory, would haunt them. The ending of their ordeal did not come with celebration but with resolve. Chelsea promised herself that she would not let Allison's shadow define her future. Bill swore silently that he would never again let distance grow between him and his daughter. Danny sharpened her resolve to protect her bloodline at any cost, even if it meant crossing lines others would not. Martin continued his role as the stern teacher, ensuring Samantha's heart and mind were fortified against the world's dangers. As for Allison, her final moments in the story were not ones of redemption but of chilling persistence. Behind the walls of her institution, she scratched Chelsea's name into the surface of her cell, over and over, until her hands bled. Her obsession did not die. It only shifted into something darker, something that lay in wait. And so, the Duprees stepped into the future with both strength and unease. They had survived, they had reunited, but they knew this was not the end of danger. It was only one chapter in the long, brutal lesson of what it meant to be Dupree, that love was fragile, obsession was deadly, and survival demanded vigilance without end. The gates had closed on Allison, but the shadow she left behind stretched farther than anyone could see.